Hello everyone, this is Bobbin Threadbare, and welcome back to Threadbare Reviews. For today's video, I'm looking at a TV miniseries made by the BBC, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. It was the request of patron JimJam78, and it was first broadcast on BBC One in 2015. The story about the story. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell started out as a book written by Susanna Clarke and published in 2004. The novel was the culmination of a decade of research, world-building, and writing, and it takes place in an alternate 19th century England in which the existence of magic is unquestioned, but its practice in England ended around 300 years ago. The book is incredibly long and detailed, and it won the 2005 Hugo Award for Best Novel. In 2012, the BBC announced that they would be creating a TV miniseries based on the novel, and production began the next year. Post-production would delay the project's broadcast until 2015, but once it came out, it also received a lot of positive attention from both critics and audiences. The 7-episode series got nominated for 4 BAFTA awards, with the BAFTA being the British version of an Oscar or an Emmy. And since that's about all I could find about the series, let's move on. The review. It's the early 19th century, and Napoleon Bonaparte is at the height of his power. It's widely known that England had magic 300 years ago, but the only practical magicians of the modern era are charlatans and quacks. But that all changes when Mr. Norrell demonstrates a real magic spell in his hometown of York, and then volunteers his services to the crown to fight Napoleon. However, to prove himself, he must first demonstrate his powers by bringing a dead woman back to life. And to pull this off, he makes a deal with a fairy king, who is only ever referred to as the gentleman. The gentleman agrees to resurrect the woman, but only if she spends half her life, her sleeping life, with him. Later on, an idle country gentleman named Jonathan Strange is in need of an occupation, and while looking for one, he discovers that he has a surprising natural talent for magic. So he heads down to London to apprentice himself to Norrell, but the two men turn out to have very different philosophies about the nature and purpose of magic. It also doesn't help that Strange gets sent to the front lines in Spain, where he is exposed to the horrors of war, and ends up using black magic for his demanding commander. Then, when he finally gets home, the gentleman tricks Strange and steals away his wife. Ultimately, Strange and Norrell part ways on bad terms. And when Strange publishes a book that would let anyone learn to use magic, Norrell steals all of the copies. Later on, Strange gets increasingly unhinged as he tries to find a way to contact the fairies and resurrect his wife, and then, once he finally succeeds, he discovers what happened to his wife, and he gets cursed when he tries to confront the gentleman. A lot of things happen after that, in particular the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy set down by the Raven King. But in the end, Strange and Norrell work together one last time to defeat the gentleman, and they ensure that English magic is once again practiced in English lands. From the first to the last shot, you can tell that, if nothing else, the BBC went all out when it came to the historically accurate costumes, sets, and props. This is Napoleon-era England, all the way down to the little details like imperfect mirrors, dimly lit rooms, and stuffy old men who still wear powdered wigs, even though all the younger generations have moved on to new fashions. There's a small but noisy parliament chamber, and a mad King George III still clinging to life, despite losing his senses. It probably helps that the BBC do these period pieces all the time, and so they've gotten pretty good at them. Spectacular magic spells are used sparingly throughout the miniseries, with about one big CGI spell per episode. All other spells are depicted using simple camera tricks, editing, or makeup. I think that was the best approach possible, for a number of reasons. First, by making such spells rare, it increases the sense of spectacle they summon up. Second, because the CG budget is relatively limited for a TV series, it means they can focus more of that budget onto a few minutes of showtime and make them as nice as possible. And then they can spend the rest of the CG budget on less difficult areas like set backdrops and establishing shots. The acting is very good throughout the series, especially when it comes to the two main leads. There is a certain amount of stiffness to most of the performances, but that's more because of the setting rather than the acting. But with all of that said, I had trouble telling two of the characters apart during the first 2 or 3 episodes. Jonathan Strange is an idle country gentleman with dark hair, a tenor voice, and an obsession with magic. John Secundus is an idle country gentleman with dark hair, a tenor voice, and an obsession with magic. Until the two Johns met face to face, I thought they were the same character. On the other hand, one character you will never mistake for another is Stephen, the black manservant. I like what they did with Stephen's character, because while at first it seems like the only reason he's black is to add a little diversity to the cast, the fact that he was born on a slave ship and will never get any respect in England because of his skin color is a big part of the plot towards the end. And while the women in the cast are mostly passive in their roles, one of them does make a point of leaving all of the men in her life who abused her and made her life miserable, so that's a positive step. However, there was something else that bugged me throughout the show, and specifically it's the single-minded focus on English magic, coupled with the complete absence of any other type of magic. The fact that they're so specific about English magic implies that other nations and cultures have their own versions of magic, and yet we never hear nor see anything regarding these other versions. And that's even though the show travels through Spain, France, and Venice. Hell, you'd think they'd at least give a nod to Scottish, Welsh, or Irish magic, since they were all under the same crown at that point, but that's simply not the case. Anyway, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is a big time investment at 7 hours, but I'd say it's worth it. The story meanders away from the main plot several times, as you'd expect from a long work, but all of the major characters are interesting, all of their fates get resolved in one way or another, and while the ending is bittersweet, it's also satisfying, and there are a couple of interesting twists that keep it from being too predictable. So, if you've got the time to spare, give the show a watch. The analysis. There's a very strong parallel in Strange and Norrell between the way the show handles magic and the struggle between tradition and modernity that was taking place during the real 19th century. Medicine in particular was going through a revolution, as doctors were discovering the importance of things like washing up between surgeries, using anesthetics, cleaning wounds, and sterilizing tools. Each of these techniques vastly improved patient survival, and the doctors who used them made a point of dissociating themselves with old-fashioned doctors and herbalists. However, by insisting on this clean break from tradition, modern doctors wound up throwing the baby out with the bathwater. A lot of old traditions existed and persisted because they worked, at least to some extent, and instead of analyzing the old techniques to see how and why they worked, modernist doctors would toss the whole practice out and insist that only modern medicine was effective and scientifically provable. But, as we know today, those doctors were being overzealous. While maggots are completely disgusting, you can use them to remove necrotizing flesh from a wound without harming the surrounding healthy flesh. And while many European herbs only have a placebo effect, a few of them do have a very real medical value to them. There were also a lot of ways to deal with the mentally ill that didn't involve locking them away in sanitariums, but that's what most doctors did by the end of the century. The new ways aren't good because they are new, and the old ways aren't bad because they are old. And yet even though this seems like it should be obvious, a lot of modernists fell into the trap of thinking this way, and people continue to make this mistake to this day. However, it's also worth remembering that the opposite is equally a fallacy. The old ways are not good because they are old, and the new ways are not bad because they are new. And while Mr. Norrell refuses to contemplate practicing old, unrespectable magic, Jonathan Strange is just as blind to how dangerous the old magics are, and how useful Norrell's new magics are. Both approaches, when considered independently, are wrong and incomplete. Some of the old traditions stuck around because they worked, even when people didn't know why they worked. Some of the new ideas are horribly dangerous and should never have become popular fads, but others are extremely useful and should have been adopted even faster than they were. In the end, the point the show is making is that generalizing based on age is both meaningless and counterproductive. The truth can be discovered at any point in time, and falsehoods are invented at every point in time. Learning to tell the difference between the two is a process, and it's one you can never afford to cut short if you really want to find the whole truth. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.